My name is Woody Money. This is Living in the Secret Place. I'm excited to get to share this with you tonight. It's part 2 of our wilderness series. We're going to look at finding purpose in the wilderness. Let's get right into it. So last week we talked about the straight line plan that we all have in our head, and I think we have this plan that we make in our minds. We see in the distance this thing that God has called us to, and we make this the shortest distance possible to that plan in our head. We make it where we assume that the easiest plan is going to happen. When I think about my destiny, I don't add in things that just make it hard. I don't know many people that do. But the truth is, a lot of times that God will call me off of this straight line path that makes perfect sense into a direction that may be off of that path, briefly to find something that He's got for me out here, and something that may not make sense for my straight line path. Maybe He wants to draw me into some other location, and right in there I'm going to find something that I need later down the road in something that does make sense. And I know we talked about that last week, and I hope you guys have found hope even in the hard times, that God has a purpose for every season of your life. He's gonna he can use any kind of hard situation, and he can help you find something in there that He can use for His glory. He can use something in that thing. And if you're in a hard season right now, in a hard place, maybe one that doesn't make sense for your destiny, maybe one that just doesn't make sense at all, maybe one that came through catastrophe or in some way totally unrelated to what you believe makes sense in your destiny, I just want to encourage you that God has a purpose. He's got a plan, just like we talked about last week, that we make our plans, that man makes his plans, but God directs our steps, and God sometimes will pull us off that straight line plan that makes perfect sense, and God will pull us into these places to find resources. We talked about spiritual resources in the wilderness. Even Moses found some. We talked about that last week, and we're going to look at it one more time. Let's look at it. Exodus chapter 2. Moses has a son, and he names him Gershom. And the name of Gershom is, I am an alien in a foreign land. And you can hear Moses's plight. Well, right there, Moses is on the run. He's a murderer. He's got all this shame thing, worrying about Egypt coming after him, kind of thing going on, and he's an alien in a foreign land. I don't know if you've ever felt that way. Maybe you felt like you were in a place in your life that you didn't understand, that you didn't have any part of, that you didn't want any part of. But I know I have. It says, during this long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites, groaning in their slavery, cried out for help, and from the depths of their slavery, their cry came up to God. Their depths of their slavery, the depths of their slavery, from the depths, the deep down depths. God heard their groaning. God remembered His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God saw the Israelites and took note. This is where God remembers the cry of His people. He hears the cry of His people in the wilderness. I want you to know that there's a people out there that maybe you know them, maybe you don't. Or these people that Moses was called to set free. Some people that are called to set free right now are crying out in their soul, that you're called to set free, are crying out in their soul for more, crying out for God, and God hears their cry. And then here's what happens. In chapter 3, it says, it's in one version of the Bible, one translation, it says, now Moses was looking after the flock of his father-in-law Jethro. I love that. Now Moses. So we've got right here, people are crying out that Moses is going to save, and now Moses. All right, so now you. Some of those people that are crying out, now you. Now, whatever your name is, you can go ahead and say your name. Now you. Was looking after the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led it to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb. So he came to the far side. We talked about the mountain of God being on the far side of the wilderness. And It says right here, this is his interaction with God. It says the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a flame blazing from the middle of a bush. Moses looked, and there was the bush blazing, but the bush was not being burnt up. Moses said, I must go across and see this strange sight and why the bush is not being burned up. I know, see, on this straight line path, everything that we choose makes sense to us. But sometimes God will pull us off of that straight line path into something that just looks strange to us. You know, it's something that maybe we see out there, and I just feel led to start this business. I feel led to, I know it doesn't make sense with necessarily where I'm going, but I feel led to start this business. I feel led to get this job. I feel led to network in this area. And it may not make sense right now, but down here it will. God's got something in that thing for you. I would encourage you guys to be in prayer even about the things that don't necessarily make sense, but may just look a little odd, may look a little strange to you. And a lot of times in these seasons when we're pulled way off, we can find these things that we can't explain why we want to do that thing or why we need to do that thing. But we can find in it something that God's got for us. And it is going to make sense eventually. But it says this, it says, I must go across and see this strange sight and why the bush is not being burned up. When Yahweh saw him going across to look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses, he said. Here I am, he answered. Come no nearer, he said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your ancestors, he said, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses covered his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So Moses saw this strange sight that Moses is rocking along. He's royalty. He's got all this purpose built up in his heart. He's got all this destiny. And then all of a sudden in Egypt, he has compassion, and he ends up murdering an Egyptian who is beating on an Israelite. He has compassion on that Israelite, and that leads him, a little to a very hasty decision to murder that Egyptian. He buries him in the sand. He's got this pull in his heart that he can't quite understand. This pull to compassion, so many times this pull, and he's having another pull right here. He says, he's tending his father's flock, his father-in-law's flock, and he feels pulled to go out into the wilderness with them, farther into the wilderness. I don't know why. He felt led to go farther into the wilderness. But even while he's out there, he has another strange pulling. And it's literally a pulling to see a strange sight. It's a pulling to go to this bush that's just burning out there. And all of these drawings that drew him out there into the wilderness are leading him to God. And so I want to encourage you that if you're doing something that may not make sense to you right now, that may not make sense to your destiny, don't give up on it, that God has a purpose in it, and he's got a purpose for your life. I think we get so worried about this thing, about purpose. But let's continue. Yahweh then said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. God saw the misery of the people in Egypt. So Moses goes into the wilderness and goes out here and sees this strange sight. I have heard them crying for help on account of their taskmasters. Yes, I am well aware of their sufferings, and I have come down to rescue them from the clutches of the Egyptians and bring them up out of that country to a country rich and broad, to a country flowing with milk and honey. God is explaining his rescue right here. God hears. God acts through Moses and drawing him out into this place. God sees him coming across the wilderness, the far side of the wilderness, to the mountain of God. And then God explains what he's going to do right here. Moses meets God face to face and finds the presence of God even in the darkest wilderness, where he's running away from being a murderer and all these things that are going on in his head. He is tending his father-in-law's sheep. They're not even his sheep, but he's on the far side of the wilderness, and he has a purpose. And God is alive in his life, bringing that purpose to life, even when he can't figure it out, even when everything still seems strange. So let's keep moving. Chapter 4. We're going to skip over to chapter 4. Moses and God have this huge interaction. And here's what happens at the beginning of chapter 4. Moses replied as follows. But suppose they will not believe me. God says you're going to lead them. You're going to set them free. But suppose they will not believe me or listen to my words and say to me, Yahweh has not appeared to you. And I just wonder if you're right now wondering and worrying, maybe if you act on that thing that is your purpose, if you wonder how people will respond, maybe you're worried that they will respond and not believe you, not believe that God sent you. And I want to bring up a story from the New Testament, just real quick, briefly. Jesus, Peter is looking at Jesus at one point, and Peter is worried about the stature of another disciple in Jesus's eyes. Jesus, it's the Apostle John, and John called himself Jesus's favorite. I'm sure all of them wondered if he was his favorite. But Peter goes, well, what about John? And Jesus says, what if I should cause him to live forever? What is that to you? Follow me. And here's what I have to say. This has got me through so many different hard times, and has got me to where even though I didn't necessarily know if someone would believe it, I went ahead and did it. In that moment, Jesus goes, look, what is that to you? He asked Peter that. He says, what is that to you? Follow me. And I'm asking you, what is that to you if they don't believe you? Follow Jesus. Even in this hard, strange time that doesn't make sense. The thing that he's asking, he's saying right here, what if they don't believe me? And I'm asking you, what is that to you? Follow me. Follow Jesus. So here we go. What if they say to me, Yahweh has not appeared to you? Yahweh then said, what is that in your hand? And here's what here's what he says. What is that in your hand? Moses says, a staff. Throw it on the ground, said Yahweh. Moses threw it on the ground. The staff turned into a snake, and Moses jumped back and recoiled from it. And so Yahweh then said to Moses, reach out, take out your hand, and catch it by the tail. He reached out his hand and caught it, and in his hand it turned back into a staff. Here's my question. God asks Moses, what is that in your hand? After walking all the way across the wilderness, after going further into the wilderness, the Bible says to the far side of the wilderness, he comes to the mountain of God, and God asks him, what is that in your hand? And I'm here to tell you that it's not about what left. It's about what's left. In this hard time, that you may be going through, in this tough time that may not make a whole lot of sense, the question is not, the concern is not what left. I know it's so easy to get concerned on, when people leave. That's just hard. When people leave your life and reject you, that's just super hard. When the job that left, that sucks. That's really hard, because that affects your entire family. The promotion that left, the displacement, whatever's going on in your life. When you had to move, you lost that house, that thing happened, it didn't work out. It's not about what you dropped along the way. It's about what you're still left holding, right? God's asked, what is in your hand? God didn't ask what left your hand. He said, what's in your hand? Because God wants to use what is still left. And so many times I get caught on who left, or what left, or what I had that I don't have anymore. And I forget what is in my hand. And God's going, what is that in your hand? What if they don't listen? Well, what is that in your hand? And Moses says, a staff. A staff. And what I want you to see, let's continue to read. Here's what happened. God says, put it down. And he put it down, and it came to life. And Moses jumped back. And God goes, grab it. So Moses, I don't know about you grabbing a snake, but I'm not really comfortable grabbing a snake, much less a stick that turned into a snake. But the staff, a staff, came alive. It came alive. It represents, look, what Moses had in his hand represents his job, his thing that he had, that he was tending those sheep all the way across the wilderness. but it is to him, it is something that he's forced into doing now. It's not something that he's just, I'm sure that he would rather probably be back in the palace and be able to have servants wait on him and do all this royal things. But Moses is holding a staff. So when God says, what's in your hand? And all these thoughts had to come back to Moses' mind. Well, I'm here because I'm a murderer, and I'm here tending someone else's sheep. I don't really own anything. I do have a wife, but I don't own anything, and I really don't have any capital building up to provide for her. And so all of this lack, all this stuff, all the things that left have got to be coming up on his mind. Well, they left, and they left, and they left, and that left, and I got kicked out, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And God goes, well, what's left? And God, I think, is asking you right now, what's left in your hand? And God says in this next deal, he says, with that I want to do my wonders. This is what he says. Yahweh said to Moses in Midian, he says, go, return to Egypt, for all those who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moses took his wife and his son, and putting them on a donkey, started back for Egypt. And Moses took the staff of God in his hand. The staff of God. Look, you got to realize Moses wrote this book, this Exodus book. And Moses wrote a staff over here. And over here, Moses wrote the staff of God. You got to understand, Moses realized in this moment that it was not just what was left, was not just a thing. It was the thing that God wanted to use. It was the staff of God. It was not a simple, boring, it wasn't representing his past. It was representing his future. What he had in his hand was not based on his past. The identity of the thing in his hand was based on his future. And your purpose is too. The thing that is left in your hand right now, the thing that you think may be just too small, the thing that you think may not make it, the thing that you may have drug out of an old season and it's just been sitting there boring you to death, that thing, listen, when God turns it to life and you jump back and you see it come alive, God says, this is my staff. This is my thing that I'm going to do my wonders. And listen, in verse 21, it says, 20 says, Moses took the staff of God in his hand, and Yahweh said to Moses, listen to this, please listen. Think of the wonders I have given you power to perform once you are back in Egypt. I want to tell you that. Look at the thing that's in your hand, the meaningless thing that you just can't see. It's dead stick. It's the thing I've got. It's the thing I'm in now. It's the thing that stayed that after everything left. Listen, think of the wonders I have given you power to perform once you are back in Egypt. Listen, God is going to set a people free with what's left in your hand. And I just want to know what's in your hand right now. And what's in my hand's a pen. And so I'm writing another book. Right now, what's left in my hand is a camera. So I'm putting videos like this one on Facebook. Right now, what's left in my hand is a book that we got to write years ago that the Lord gave us. What's left in my hand is social media. Listen, you have so much in your hand. God has blessed you so greatly to be able to reach the world. God has given you His Word and His Spirit and power right now. God's given you a job. God's given you a business, some kind of thing that maybe is just struggling along. But God, I'm telling you, think of the wonders that God could do with that thing. Think of the wonders that God could do with that camera. Think of the wonders that God could do with a book, with a social media account. Think of the wonders that God could do through you right now, through something so simple as a stick, just a dead old stick. But God brings it to life and it can do His wonders. And so when you're thinking about your purpose tonight, as you're laying down, I want you to shift your focus from who left, because it's so painful, and shift your focus to what's left in your hand right now. What do you have in your hand? What can you do right now? I thank you so much for joining me and I'm going to be praying for you. If you have any thoughts at all, please leave them in the comments section. I would love to talk to you. I love you so much. Stay in the secret place. And I can't wait till next week. We're going to talk about Abraham, and we're going to talk about protection of the promise in the wilderness. It's going to be amazing. You don't have to protect your promise. God himself, the promise giver, is going to protect your promise. And I want to show you how that's true. You don't have to stay up all night wondering how you're going to get to the end. God is going to protect that thing. You're the one called to that thing. And God is going to bless you. I thank you so much for hearing this message on purpose. And cannot wait for part 3 next week. I love you. God bless. Stay in the secret place.